Welcome back to the Changing Minds and Changing Lives podcast. I'm your host, Julie Sowash, co founder and strategic advisor at Disability Solutions and CEO at the Catch 22 Group. And I'm, as always, so happy to be back with you all today. Before we bring in our guests, I wanted to share a couple of pieces of disability related news that kind of caught my eye this week. The first from Disability Scoop, which, if you guys are not subscribers, I think they do a phenomenal job on kind of keeping us up to date on the latest news impacting the community. The piece is titled IDD Providers Increasingly Swallowed Up by Private Equity. And it was published just earlier this month. And the author is Michelle Diamant. Over the past decade, I learned in this article, private equity firms are gobbling up private disability services providers and making billions with a B, off of services provided to people with the most significant disabilities, oftentimes living in the community and funded through both Medicaid and home and community-based services. So what about this caught my eye other than the billions? The question is what does PE want with a DSP organization? We all know these are nonprofits that are no one's getting rich off, serving people with disabilities, and are often reliant on state and government payments to fund those services. And PE, if you don't know, is often just looking for fast, short-term capital returns on their investments. What I learned is that these PE firms, which are now employing over 100,000 people around the United States, and again, have made billions through just cutting services. And here's the kicker. The big profit is because they are saddling the nonprofit service providers with the PE's own debt, which is a completely legal and I would say highly unethical thing to do. And so as we're kind of coming into the spring and the budget season, and potentially cutting Medicaid payments and looking at potential reinstitutionalization of not an insignificant percentage of our population, the lack of oversight on these PE deals is likely to inflict more suffering on our most vulnerable. And I just want you guys to be aware of this because this is something that normally in employment space would kind of completely slip by me. But a lot of these people are also receiving employment services from the DSP providers, and it's going to impact people getting to work, living in our communities, and having the services that they need on a daily basis. With that, I also want to share some good news. Apple announced this week that they're adding additional accessibility features in their newest iOS release, including improved Braille reading, better voice replication, and a feature I think is really cool called nutrition labels. And not actual nutrition labels, but a feature within the App Store that tells users which accessibility features work in a particular app. So really another great reason to make sure that the apps you're creating are accessible. So there's always a lot happening in our world, and I'm super curious, what is on you guys' mind this week or anytime? Let us know so we can make sure our listeners and our viewers know what's happening in the world around you in disability and inclusion. But with that, I do want to welcome our guest, who I'm very excited to be able to have a conversation with, David Rice, who is also joined by his interpreter, Brianna. David is a disability advocate, a disability employment architect. I love that title. Building accessible workplaces, executive leader, and public speaker. Also a dad, a dog dad. Ooh, I'm going to get those words out. A dog dad. We all love our puppies around here. David has an impressive history of advocacy and policy work for our community, including at the National Institutions of Health and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. He is currently working on employment initiatives at the CEO Commission for Disability Employment. David, welcome to Changing Minds, Changing Lives.
Hi, everybody. Hi, thank you. I'm so happy to be here today.
So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so a little bit about me is my name is David Rice, and I am deaf, profoundly deaf. I've been deaf since I was the age of 4, And growing up in an environment where I was the only deaf person in my entire town, let alone my only school. There was a lot of different challenges that I had growing up, but with some really great parents supporting by my side, I did fairly well in school. I played football, played baseball, played basketball. I was fully integrated into the entire school community. And it was during my time and as I think it was my junior year as a one of the football players, and we invited my coach invited one of they were called Camp Rachel. It was one of the camps that came in to do sort of like an Olympic type of event for those with intellectual disabilities. And it was my first exposure really to disability outside my own lens. And I fell and absolutely in love with it just because I had a sort of connection there. And I continued doing that all the way through until I graduated and went into Catholic University of America. And at Catholic, I wanted to keep my disability advocacy going. I kind of found my passion of who I was. And we created one of the first dorm rooms where everyone in a dorm learned American Sign Language. It was hearing people. There were deaf individuals there, and that entire floor of the dorm room was to learn about American Sign Language and to be able to speak in American Sign Language during my freshman and sophomore year. And it was during that time I got involved with doing some sports at Gully Dead University had a baseball team where I apologize, a high school baseball team called Model Secondary School for the Deaf, and I did that for about 8 years. In my workplace, I got into the National Institute of Health mainly to because I I, I felt like being in the cutting edge research and science was something that I would absolutely love to do. And I first jumped in. I was an executive assistant to the executive officer. I loved the work of the National Institute of Health. And as I was developing my career, I started to see, hey, they're the disability program manager at NIH that oversees all the disability employment programs at NIH. And I'm thinking over there, like, that's the job I want in 5, 6 years. And so I started doing some work in nonprofit, Deaf in Government, becoming the president of Deaf in Government, continuing to work on my disability advocacy on the side to kind of beef up my resume that when that position opened, that I would be well suited and positioned for it. And when I got the job, I was ecstatic because it was something that allowed me to look at disability employment across NIH, but also for health disparities for individuals with disabilities, something I'm deeply committed and passionate about. And so when I started doing all of this disability employment, I started doing some consulting work with the CEO Commission on Disability Employment, where we go into organizations that are committed to disability employment and we sort of look at where they are, do an assessment, get some improvements, some best practices. We work with our servicing partners to be able to provide them some resources that they may need. And so disability employment is something that it, it's a calling. It's a legacy that I want to leave. It's something that I think we all deserve is a meaningful employment. And I really want to give that back to the disability community here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean that's amazing. Just top to bottom, such a fantastic story. Always thankful for good parents. No
Oh,
matter if they have
yes.
a disability or not, makes so much difference. And you and I had a chance to chat before we recorded, and we both kind of share that passion for helping providers and organizations better understand what it's like to be disabled in the healthcare system. And I think there are a lot of assumptions that everyone with a disability is either sick or ill, or even that medical facilities are accessible and healthcare providers are trained to support patients with disabilities, which we found in the last few years to be definitely very untrue. Can you tell our listeners some of the most kind of common barriers to health care access for our community?
Yeah. I think on a generic term, the biggest barrier is, the lack of understanding. In fact, when we were doing some research on trying to get the National Institute of Health to accept disability as a health disparity population, where we can put funding and research in to try to remove those barriers, we found that a lot of the medical universities and colleges out there may only provide like a couple hour seminars on disability related to social construct of disability identity, because a lot of our medical schools, they focus on so much about the cure and so much about fixing the person, and I feel in some ways they get away from the human aspect of an individual coming in to, they have an ailment, a broken bone, they get sick, God forbid they have diagnosed with cancer. On top of their disability they already have, we need to bring that humility in there. And what I mean by humility, I mean when someone is deaf and hard of hearing, you don't make them have to constantly fight for an interpreter. You know that you have a deaf patient. You already have it on your chart that they need an interpreter. Make sure that you're providing it to them. And when I look back at healthcare, when I talk briefly about the social aspect of versus the medical model, if we can mix, I'm not, because the medical model, not for disability, but we do want our physicians and our medical provider to be able to fix or cure whatever that is outside of their identity of who they are. I'll give an example. I'm a deaf man. I do not want cure for my hearing. I am happy with who I am. I know a mania has shaped me for who I am. So I don't want to go to a doctor's office and they're asking me questions about why I don't have a cochlear implant. I'm there for, I had the flu. I'm there for something, from other reasons that I'm looking for. Really, what I'm trying to get is I'm trying to get better from the flu. I don't really need to be discussed a lot about my hearing loss and why I don't have a cochlear implant. And that's really about that identity portion of it, realizing that not everyone that has a disability wants to be cured from the disability. So those are some high level barriers. There are a lot of barriers particularly if you think about the blind and low vision population out there. Walking in a hospital is already very difficult for someone who's sighted. And how will you expect the people that have blind and low vision to go into an ER if you don't have the accessibility tools out there and be able to ensure that they get the care that they need? And the same goes with deaf and hard of hearing. When you walk into the check-in area, what's the first thing they do? Oh, we don't know. Let's write on a piece of paper. Why can't we use other technologies that are out there that can provide them with not only top care healthcare, but top notch customer service for people with disabilities?
Yeah, I think it's such a good point because it is customer service. You have your choice of which facility to go to in some cases. Some cases you're very limited. And I think if I could summarize and you tell me if I've got this right, is really the biggest barrier is lack of proactive, thoughtful engagement for patients with disabilities and often focusing on the wrong thing at time of treatment.
Yeah, yes, exactly. You hit the nail on the head. I know I'm a little long-winded person, but that's basically a great summarization of what I was trying to convey. It, and if you think about it, though, the medical providers, they really do, for the majority of them, they do care for their patients. I've been in we used to call it the we still do, the National Institute of Hope. You go in there and you talk to the nurses, you talk to the doctors in there, they really care for their patient. but it's the lack of education around how to interact with someone with a disability. It's something that I think medical schools can provide a little bit more content than just a 2 hour seminar on how to work with patients with disabilities, with different disabilities. And in fact, I'll bring up a real quick story at the National Institute of Health. We used to have on our mission statement in the National Institute of Health, where it said to reduce the burden of disabilities and illnesses. And I talked to a lot of co-workers of mine. We had an employee resource group called Disability and no, I mean Deaf at NIH, and we were just talking like I don't feel like my disability is a burden. So why should why should that be a mission of the best biomedical research center in the world to reduce the burden of disabilities? And so after talking to the NIH director at that time, Dr. Collins, and then talking to the EEOC director at the time, Deborah Chu, we all agreed that we could remove the word burden because we have to think about people with disabilities don't really consider them a burden to anyone. We're people that pay our taxes. We're people that want to work. We are people that go to the gym. We go golfing. We go on vacations. We do everything just like anyone else does, except for that we have a disability that prevents us to fully participate in it like everyone else can.
Yeah, no, I love that story. That is such a great way that you can see how impactful a single word can be on how greatest biomedical agency in the world approaches a quarter of at least the US population and more than a billion people worldwide. And you mentioned the EEOC. So I know you had a stint at the EEOC. Kind of talk to us about what you did there and kind of what your thoughts are on the current state of the EEOC.
Yeah, so first, just want to make a little quick correction. So, at the National Institute of Health, each agency has an EEO office, and so that was where I was housed. I was within the EEO office, which took took directive from the EEOC. So we
Oh,
worked under all the EEOC laws and regulations and stuff. So I'm fully aware of EEO laws and requirement regulations and stuff like that. So I'd be happy to answer the question. Can you repeat that question real quick?
yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of the current state of the EEOC with the changes in executive orders and enforcement under the new administration?
Yeah, it has not been easy, and they're not at quotum right now. They don't have enough commissions to make decisions. Fortunately, we still have some of um, the judges and administrative judges that are there that are still carrying out some cases and stuff. But as far as appeals go, that usually goes up to the commission level where they vote on the appeal, but there's not a quorum right now, so we're unable to do that. That's on a broad scale, not just for disability employment, but for all discriminations across our laws here at the United States. So I think the biggest challenge we're having right now is that the law is law. And I know that some people think that things are not being followed in the law, but I fully believe that our justice system in the United States, I mean, there's so much research on. The United States does have a long justice system. It takes from the start of a justice to when you actually justice happens. It tends to be very lengthy. And I'm still hanging on to that, hanging on my hat on that eventually it might be 3, 4, 5 years from now, eventually things that may have been, against the law or something that may have been decided that wasn't quite the precedent of what happened before will get resolved in a later time. But the biggest challenge we're having right now is the language around DEI, the misconception of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the sole fact that there is this idea that are getting jobs because they are a particular race or because they're a particular gender. It has always and still continues to be against the law to give someone a job basis of race, sex, gender, natural origin, color, um, and age. Yeah, I was just thinking about and age. And when we sit there and think about when we remove DEI in there, you're sort of taking away all the work that we made and the progress that we made through there. And where the progress was being made was in our targeted outreach. That means we know that there are qualified individuals in the United States. We just need them to know that, hey, we have job openings. And going to career fairs, going to different universities across the United States, and letting them know about my particular case, the National Institute of Health. That has been the biggest challenge because that right there, that effort was always under the umbrella of DEI. And but that is the biggest challenge we're having right now with an EEO office.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect summary. So, as we're thinking about, kind of what we're seeing at Disability Solutions is we've seen a lot less pullback in talent acquisition spending in our community, which is really, really positive. We're seeing a lot of companies go quiet, so to speak. If you were working with a CEO and or a company and they're really committed to continuing to do the work even in this current environment, um, what would kind of be your top suggestions to support both, I would say, on the job seeker side, so on the applicant side, and then once you have employees with disabilities in the door and addressing some of their concerns over kind of the current state of affairs?
Yeah, I think the number one thing the CEOs can do is communicate to their staff that they are still committed to this. I know that there is this sense of publicity, like publicly saying that I'm committed to that. Well, I think that you can do that. That does help. But I think what helps more is talking directly to your employee, saying that we are still committed and that and we will continue to do the look for disability employment, make it more accessible. Because when we look at data, you know, NIH is big in data. Like we have scientists everywhere. If I make a suggestion, they say, "Show me the data, David." And there is data, actual data out there that shows that organizations that really commit in a disability employment see greater revenue, greater shareholder profits, and then they also see greater satisfaction from their staff, their entire staff, not just individuals with disability. And the reason for that is because you're allowing people to bring their whole self into the workplace. That means that if I have an intellectual disability, if I have a disability, I can bring my whole self and can bring ideas that I may have learned through navigating my life as a disabled individual, and I'd be able to apply it to the workplace. A great example of this, and I know we talked about this early in our earlier discussion, was the electric toothbrush. We think about the electric toothbrush and we take it for granted that it's just a little motor and dentists say that we must do it. But that was invented for people that had mobility issues. And so when we think about it, now everyone pretty much uses an electric toothbrush, and it's universally made for everyone. So we as a society have benefited for something that was there to help individuals with mobility issues. That is the kind of mindset that these CEOs need to be thinking of. They need to be thinking of, all right, so where are some of the barriers? Because when we talk about 30% of individuals in the world, 30% of people have a disability, some shape or form of some disability. Those are your customers too. So can you just imagine if you were not accessible and you basically said, no, we're not going to do accessible. You're losing out on 30% of your customer base. And so that is critical to look at it that, and then on top of that, if you're having a competitor that, if we're saying a financial institute, let's say two banks together, on top of that, if you're providing more accessible tools for people to go into that banking, guess where individuals with disabilities are going to go? They're going to go to the place that has the more accessible banking than the one that does not. So you're basically expanding your customer. You're basically ensuring that you keep your customers. You're making sure that your employees feel safe and feel as if they're contributing to your mission at your organization.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. One, both the innovation of people with disabilities, but also the brand commitment. And so I would be really curious to your perspective as we've seen sort of this. I hate the word backlash, but the pushback against DEI and what I consider to be a pretty rapid regression of companies who previously purported to or performatively talked about supporting diverse communities. What are your thoughts on how their brands are going to be impacted in the long term as we see them pull back on these commitments they've made to all of the underserved communities over the last few years?
This is where I wish I had Marty McFly and Back to the Future to be able to go see the future a little bit. But what I think is going to happen is we're going to see in 1, 2, 3 years what they're missing out on, and not only missing out on the talent side, but on the consumer side. We're already seeing it somewhat in Target. There's evidence out there that their footprint in Target has dropped tremendously due to their discommitment. And if you watch the news at all, there was sort of a backtrack from that. And I think there's some power and collective community, choosing to spend the money where they believe the values of that organization or that company and stuff. But I really do see. I'm gonna. What's gonna happen is what I'm seeing now. The trend is that they're going quiet. They're quietly removing it, or if they're quietly staying under the radar, that they're still committed to it, but maybe they place it somewhere else. Maybe they're placing it in procurement, or placing it in OHR, or placing it somewhere else rather than its own entity of DEI. But I challenge those that are listening here to really look at where you're shopping. I'll give you a perfect example. IKEA, they are they've doubled down on it. Costco, they have doubled down on it. And it's not about like, them. I think what's more powerful to me is that they see the value in it, and they're not going to remove something that's going to make their company less efficient or make their company remove the dollars amount, like to have less talent there. They want the best of the best at their organization. And then I hate to break it to some people, but people with disabilities are some of the best, brightest minds I've ever known. And having them in your organization is going to make your organization so much stronger and better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I promise I have not stepped foot in a Target since they pulled back, and there are a couple Target things I really, really miss. But now I've broken the habit. So I think it's even just a longer term of I'm not shopping there for right now. By the time they recommit, then I'll have found those things other places. And so it's a long-term impact. And I think that we are at a place of sophistication, maturity as a community that we are starting to really see through the charade or the facade a lot. And I think you just make excellent points. And so this has been such a fun conversation, David. I really appreciate you and Brianna joining me. And as we wrap up, I always like to leave with two questions. And the first one is, what is one thing, and you might have just told me because I love your innovation conversation. What's one thing you could tell a CEO that will change their mind about hiring talent with disabilities?
One thing that I can give is actually something that my boss has given me is giving me the freedom and the opportunity to be the best version of myself and not to hold and limit anyone because of their disability. I'm hard of hearing. I am profoundly deaf in my left ear and my right ear. We go to meetings all the time. I answer the phones. I have technology that handles that. There has never been once where my boss has said, "Can you do this?" No, my bosses believed that I was able to do that, and they believed in me. I think that it's such a powerful thing, and just give your employees, if they're especially if they're looking and they're motivated to be developing their career, give them every opportunity to be the best version of themselves. And that is really just believing in them and allowing them to be the best version of themselves.
No, I love that. That's even a different direction than I anticipated you would go. So then, last question is, what is something that someone did for you in your life that helped change your life?
I, I honestly think um, it was during a time of difficult conversation. It was, a lot of people don't like uncomfortable conversations. I've gotten better at it, and it was during a time of a, a uncomfortable situation where I had to go in and talk to him. This was a different boss in the time, and he basically sat me down, David. You know, we need to do this a little bit differently. We need to have better outcomes. We need to, set you up for success. We need to go to these different trainings and whatever. He didn't look at me and saying, he never said that I'm not meeting, I'm not meeting the job. He never said that, I can't. He basically said that there are some shortcomings that you're right now, and let's look at how we can invest in you to get better at those things. And that was very, very early in my career. I'm talking the first 1 or 2 years. And I've learned from that moment on that if I don't know something, I just get educated on it. I either read a book, go to a training, or go to a webinar, see YouTube, listen to a podcast to get educated on the particular thing that I may be lacking. And I challenge everyone out there that embrace sometimes those uncomfortable conversations, embrace them to the fact that you're listening to the feedback to make you better versus to the negative feedback that, oh, I'm not improving on that. That's just your point of view. Look at it as an opportunity to really foster your career in any direction that you want to go in.
Yeah, great point. And we have far too few leaders who spend the time to do that development with their employees. And I'm glad that you got that experience. So, David, if someone wants to connect with you, how do they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Disability by David. Basically, what I do is I try to do every few days or so. I like to try to give a post that talks about disability innovation. A lot of it stems from the book that I read from Bob Luckett, which is a case study on disability innovation. And it really, what I'm trying to do is at least to raise the awareness that disability employment is not a charity based idea. Disability employment is an assets based idea. You are giving your organization the best assets and the best mind to be able to make your organization succeed. And and sometimes it just takes giving them the chance, giving them the opportunity. And it'll be wondrous to see where your organization goes when you do give that chance to them.
All right. So, David Rice on LinkedIn. Thank you, David, for joining us. Thank you, Brianna, for joining us. Another great conversation here at Changing Minds and Changing Lives. And before we go, I just wanted to let you guys know that our Q2 2025 webinar is going to be June 17th at 12 p.m. Eastern. Our topic is going to be a review of the first 150 days of the new administration and its impact on disability rights and disability employment. We'll pop the link in the show notes. And if you're catching this after the fact, don't worry. You can still go to our website, disabilitytalent.org, and catch the replay. Until then, we'll see you next time. Thanks.